Dear Convo friends, welcome to episode 1 of Maai and AI, which is about me, Maike, and my adventures in generative AI. The reason why I started this series is that many of my conversation design friends ask me, "Hey Mike, you are now apparently a prompt engineer or a prompt designer. What is it that you do all day? What does your day look like? And are you really prompting images of Dutch women in big, gigantic wooden shoes all day? Or is there more to it?" And I can totally get the confusion, so I thought, why not put together a little explainer of different types of prompting in my perception, and especially the type of prompting that I do as a prompt designer? Because when we think of prompting, it in the context of generative AI, it comes in many shapes and guises. All the way from ChatGPT and people trying to sell you very expensive prompt libraries with prompts that you, as a conversation designer, could probably write yourself and do a lot better. We have Perplexity for research, that's prompting too. We prompt images with Dolly, we prompt songs with Suno, we can use the OpenAI playground to get a bit more technical, and we can prompt in code in Python. This is all called prompting. So, when we talk about prompting, what do we mean? Well, the main thing that all these different forms have in common is that they deal with prompts. And prompts are instructions for a large language model. Large language models are the beating heart of any and every generative AI application. It's literally what makes them tick, and what sets them apart from traditional apps. Now, when we talk about prompting, the way you read it on the internet in articles, the courses that you take in prompt engineering, and the big hype around content prompting is typically about prompting with ChatGPT, Gemini, Bing, and also with Suno, Midjourney for other modalities. And this is what I call conversational prompting. It's typically prompting through the front end of a commercial end user app like ChatGPT, which is basically a layer around the large language model. It's typically one off and ad hoc. It's for personal use, so you are the one doing the prompting and you're also the one benefiting from your prompts. And it's typically quite conversational as we go, quite unstructured. I know some people who are very structured in their ChatGPT approach and they actually design prompts for reuse. But the typical ChatGPT user will probably just use ChatGPT for a bit of fun, for a bit of task support, or for the occasional question. Although, bear in mind, large language models are not search engines. Again, some examples. Oh, let me just move myself a little bit out of the way. Sorry, Pebbles. Research with Perplexity. The prompt here is, can you summarize this week's news on generative AI and prompt engineering? I get a nice little wrap up and some sources, which I still need to check because some of these sources are actually not from this week. Another example is, of course, ChatGPT itself, where the prompt is, can you help me build a trivia game focused on famous inventors? Start by asking me which time periods inventors intrigue me the most. And ChatGPT just spins up a very nice quiz. And same for Copilot, Microsoft Copilot. Here the prompt is, can you write a short email for my boss? I can't be at the meeting because I need to go to the dentist. And Copilot just returns you a very nice and sweet email that you can send. Probably want to rewrite it a little bit, and then you're done. Chances that you revisit these prompts are actually not that big. So, conversational prompting, right? Which is ad hoc, but there's more to prompting than just this commercial end user app kind of application. And that's what I call prompt design, which still involves a lot of ad hoc prompting, but it also involves intentional and structured prompting with a very user centered design perspective in mind. And that's what I do most of the time. So when I look at what I do as a prompt designer is that I prompt not so much as an end user, but I prompt for other people, and my prompts typically act as intermediary steps in LLM based or hybrid applications. For example, a sales proposal generator, or a bit closer to home for us conversation designers, a customer support chatbot, where this is what the end user sees. Please describe what the sales proposal is for. And the end user can say an online course in prompt design for conversation designers. Then the bot will ask, what is the estimated budget? €625. And it will generate a sales proposal with some, structure, some headings, some topics, and some blocks. But what the end user doesn't see is that my prompt runs in the background, and my prompt lays out the entire behavior of this bot. It tells the bot what its task is, also how it should format the output, and what it should do with the input, and how it should generate the sales proposal. So typically, my prompts drive the global behavior and the interaction model of the AI. So I tell it, you are a sales proposal assistant. I tell it, your task is to do this and this and this. I will give it some instructions which turn into different user bot turn pairs. Um, this prompt is not visible to the end user. It's also not editable for the end user, because if I would open up this prompt to my end user, they would turn my sales proposal generator into, I don't know, Grumpy, the most grumpy conversation designer ever, which is still around somewhere. Also, this prompt is part of a larger workflow. For instance, I haven't prompted for the input part. That is something I just defined by ordinary logic. Also, what happens after this is, namely, you can download the sales proposal or email it to an email address. That's typically not something I design with a prompt, but that's something I design with traditional logic and code. Typically, my prompts are structured with a prompt template, and they are reusable. For instance, if I have a prompt that checks for the readability level of a piece of text, that might be very handy to have here, but in many other apps as well. So it's really nice if I can just take that prompt, insert it anywhere, and reuse it where necessary. And a very important difference between conversational prompting and prompt design is that my prompts should give consistent and repeatable results. Like my sales proposal, even if you run it 50 times, 100 times, it should always give the same structure back. It should always use the same tone of voice. And that is something that is not easy to do with prompting, because, hey, LLMs were made to hallucinate. That's their superpower. They're super creative. So to kind of harness that power into something more structured takes a bit of effort and a bit of know how. So, some components in my prompt design process, there's many more, but some of the highlights is that I typically design system prompts. So, what you just saw in my example with the task and the role and the instruction, this can get quite long, like a few pages. This is what we call a system prompt, and you can see it as the mother prompt of an AI application. It's the prompt that always stays valid. No matter how long you talk to your AI bot or your AI app, this prompt will always be operational in the background. Another thing is that I work with prompt templates, and these I design myself. So I make sure that my prompts always follow the same global structure so that they can be easily reusable, that it can be easily tested and easily updated. Another thing is that sometimes, or actually most of the times, one prompt is not enough, because if you have a very long prompt, it makes sense to chop it up in little pieces, little um, yeah, components, if you will, little building blocks that you can chain together, and the output of one prompt will kind of be the input of the next prompt, and this is what we call prompt chaining. And prompt chaining also is very close to what we conversation designers do when we design conversational logic for our traditional chatbots. Using external sources, undoubtedly you by now have heard me talking about RAG, retrieval augmented generation, or talk to your document. Using external sources is a really great way to ground your large language model into reality, make it hallucinate less, and also make it more accurate, more useful because you can use your own information in your AI app. That is stuff that you might have heard before, but as a conversation designer, I do a little bit more. I also help my developers and my end users in model selection. Which large language model is most suitable for which use case? Typically, when I work in Dutch or for Dutch speaking clients, I will choose a different model for generating Dutch text than I do for underlying logic or simple tasks. Because, for instance, Claude Opus is much better in Dutch than GPT. Also, I do model fine tuning again, especially for Dutch, to get the Dutch just right. Sometimes you just need to fine tune the model a little bit with typical Dutch language patterns and typical Dutch conversational patterns. I build workflows and automations because prompting is one part, but making it part of a larger workflow, that's the other part of prompt design. And conversational architecture. Do we do NLU? Do we do keyword recognition? Do we do LLM based bots or do we do a mix? Do we make a hybrid application? This is a field that's still in its infancy, and it's really exciting to see how we can combine different technologies to get the best out of each technology and to make sure that we use each technology in its own strength. Some examples. A system prompt, well, this is a relatively small one for a virtual study buddy. And hey, we even have some conversational flows. Even in LLM based bots, we still have flows. We just don't hard code them anymore. That's the difference. And apart from prompt design, we have the proper prompt engineering, and I'll be very brief about that. It's basically prompt design because many prompt engineers can also do prompt design, but it also involves building an actual app with the prompt. So, not just having the prompts, but making sure you have a front end, a back end, that you can store your context history, that you have a database, and that you can put everything live. To productize an LLM based app, it's not easy, and you need some proper, solid, technically savvy developers for that. And that's where I see prompt engineering, where I take my designs just like a conversation designer. And I think that's probably, yeah, it's what I would typically go to a developer for. Sorry for the split infinitive. And it's something I'm learning to do myself, some parts, like some parts of the coding. But just like a conversation designer would typically ask for an API integration, and go to a developer for that. Prompt engineers are my developers that help me bring my ideas to life in a robust, testable, and compliant way. So they also help me structuring and coding my natural language prompt so that it fits into a piece of software. They do my API integrations and they help me build the actual application. Like, I'm not a backend designer, right? Don't ask me to design a database. That's not my job. And some people just really enjoy doing that. Also, very important, how to test. Not even technical testing, but also the functional testing, because how do you test whether an LLM has returned a correct answer? There's all kinds of guardrails and um, guidelines for that, but they're only just being invented. So it's really nice to work with some technical people alongside and work on that together. And hey, we've got some, it's a bit of an old version, but this is a chat completion code, which I can also now write from scratch by heart. So are these all separate roles? Well, that depends as usual. Just like in conversation design, what platform do you use and do you actually need to code? Because you might have a no-code, low-code platform. What size is your team? I mean, I'm a team of one, so I basically need to learn a little bit of everything. Fortunately, I've got some great people around me that can help me with the more technical stuff. Thank you, Marco. And but if you're a small team, chances are that you might have to do a double role. Also, what use cases do you work on? Do you work on use cases that require a lot of technological integrations, for instance? But they are definitely separate skill sets, and that's my point of this little explainer. skill sets that we might not necessarily have yet, and also skill sets that don't have a lot of training for them yet. Um, Tooling might be different. I'll come back to that in a second explainer, like, okay, what's my stack? What's my toolkit for prompt design? And they also require separate learning tracks. And this is where I've got some good news because courses are coming, especially for people like us who know how to build traditional bots but might be a bit in the dark about prompt design. Um, Introduction to Conversation Design in an LLM World, that's my first in person online course. The first cohort is fully booked, it's the European one. I'm working on a US East Coast one. US West Coast is going to be a bit difficult unless someone wants to invite me over. I mean, you never know, so I just try. Also coming up, prompt design for conversation designers. So that's not your typical chat GPT, like, this is the only prompt you need course, but we'll look into how to build these system prompts that allow you to build or lay the foundation for generative AI apps. And this one is a course that's based on my very popular talk, Content Driven Interaction: How to Make the Most of RAG, where we take your own documents, do document analysis, and use that information to improve your RAG and go from Q&A to something much more exciting. I'll be communicating about these courses on my LinkedIn, so follow me there if you want to stay updated. And I'll work on a second explainer and publish that pretty soon. That's it for now. Groetjes, talk soon.